All right, so taking a look at the first game of the October 1994 LSAT exam, we encounter a piano instructor who is scheduling one lesson for each of 6 students. The 6 students are Grace, Henry, Jeanette, Steve, Tom, and Una. One lesson per day for each of 6 consecutive days. So we have a straight linear game here. We have 6 students and 6 days, and we are trying to place each of these students in one of these 6 days. So now let's turn our attention to the conditions. The first condition tells us that Henry's lesson is later in the schedule than Jeanette's lesson. So again, we know that Henry is coming after Jeanette, which tells us that Henry cannot be first and that Jeanette cannot be sixth. Our second condition tells us that Una's lesson is later in the schedule than Steve's lesson. So again, we know that Steve is coming before Una. Same exact logic. Una can't be first. Steve cannot be sixth. The third condition tells us that Steve's lesson is exactly 3 days after Grace's lesson. So we have Grace's lesson, and then 1, 2, and 3 days later, we're going to see Steve. So we're going to have this split block of GS, again, split off with 2 spaces in between. And that by itself tells us that Steve can't go first, second, or third, and similarly that G cannot be sixth, fifth, or fourth. But notice we can combine our second and third rules to say that Una is coming behind this entire block, which again is going to tell us that Una cannot be first, second, third, or fourth. So we know that Una is either going to be in 5 or 6. And then again, having Una appear after that box also tells us that G cannot be third, so G must be either first or second. And the fourth and final condition tells us that Janet's lesson is on the first or else the third day. So again, if Janet's lesson is not on day 1, we know it must be on day 3. And if Janet's lesson is not on day 3, then Janet's lesson must be on day 1. And we should notice that this game is extremely restrictive. There's only 2 places possible for our GS box. It's either going to go 1, 4 or 1, 5. So why don't we take a moment and try to draw these 2 scenarios out to see if we can come up with some more restrictive scenarios. Again, we know 6 days. Now in one scenario, let's place our GS 1, 4. In the other scenario, we will place our GS in 2, 5. Well, in the second scenario, we know that U must be in slot 6. And then the question is who remains. We know we have J, H, and T. Well, we know H comes after J, so H can't be first, which means the only possibilities for 1 are J and T. And that would be one scenario. In our first scenario, we know that if J is not first, it must be third, so we can place J third. We know that H and U now must be 5 and 6. We don't know the order, so we have our split options. And the only person left for place 2 is T. So you notice by placing those extremely restrictive variables of the GS split block, we're able to come up with 2 more restrictive scenarios. One is completely filled out, and then the 2, 5 scenario has a little bit of work left to do, but this would be the setup for this game. Hope it was helpful. Let's move on to game number 2.